17th of April 2025. Campania, Via Sant'Agata, house number 14. Police patrol arrived at the scene following a social worker's report. The apartment door was opened by a man, Antonio R., 40 years old, a driver. His hands were trembling. When the police officers entered inside, they immediately felt a strong smell of dampness and mold. Antonio pointed to the bathroom door, silently lowering his head. Inside, on the tiled floor, lay a thin mattress covered with stains. Nearby stood a bucket. By the wall was a long, rusty chain. At its end, pressed into the corner, was Francesca, who had disappeared from school services radar since March 2015. The official protocol noted body exhaustion, weight loss of approximately 30%. Condition assessed as severe but stable. Francesca was provided urgent medical intervention. Experts quickly discovered that the chain had been fixed to the wall with a homemade anchor. The bathroom had no windows except for one tiny ventilation opening leading outside. This would become one of the key details, though in the first hours of investigation no one paid attention to it. Police officers questioned the neighbors. No one confirms hearing any suspicious sounds or calls for help. "The walls are old but solid," explains one of the residents, an elderly woman from the apartment across the hall, to the inspector. The bathroom door was located directly against the wall of the neighboring house, which had belonged to the recently deceased Luciano S. His death occurred a year earlier, in April 2024, at the age of 58. The windows of his house looked directly onto the bathroom wall where Francesca was located. The father, Antonio R., immediately becomes the main suspect. In his file, police officers find an old charge under the domestic conflict statute, a fine for assault issued back in 2013. Details of alcohol dependency also surface. However, despite obvious suspicions, Antonio cooperates with the investigation from the first minutes, offering no resistance. But another name appears in the case materials: the neighbor, the deceased Luciano S. He died in his apartment from a heart attack, which was confirmed by medical expert conclusion. However, police were puzzled. Why did Luciano, who lived his entire life next door, not notice what was happening right under his windows? Or did he simply remain silent? During the initial questioning of school staff, strange testimony emerges. Francesca's teacher, Julia P., insists that back in early 2015, shortly before the disappearance, Antonio openly threatened to take Francesca out of school forever. Her words sound absolutely certain. However, there is only a written statement from Julia herself in the official case. An audio recording confirming her testimony is absent. For now, investigators treat her words cautiously, suspecting possible personal dislike or subjective perception. The investigation sharply changes direction when, on the second day after Francesca's liberation, a woman identifying herself as the deceased Luciano's niece comes to the police station. She brings her uncle's old smartphone, found while sorting through his belongings. The screen is cracked, memory almost full. On one of the last video files, dated 10th of April 2023, something strange is recorded. The video lasts only 15 seconds, shot through a dirty half-open window directed straight at the wall of Antonio's bathroom. In the frame flickers a thin, clearly weakened hand trying to reach the ventilation opening grate, but the window suddenly slams shut. The video cuts off. Experts wonder why Luciano shot this video a year before his death, but never reported it to police. Was he hiding something or afraid of something else? There is no clear answer yet. Another detail emerges. The case materials include a certain document relating to government social assistance that Antonio received for Francesca until April 2025. For now, only the investigative team knows about this document. The amount and details remain closed to the public, but Antonio's motive may now receive a new explanation. The end of the first day of investigation leaves many unresolved details. The main suspect is Antonio. But the neighbor's silence, The mystery of the enigmatic video and the role of care benefits are what the investigation still has to determine. Antonio regularly received benefits intended for Francesca for 8 years. According to documents, the girl was listed as a student at another school in the neighboring region, and money came in steadily every month. But bank statements showed a different reality. Almost all payments were withdrawn through the same ATM at the Da Silvio bar. Only one question remained, the answer to which investigators were now seeking. Did Antonio know that sooner or later this would be revealed, or did he act all this time with absolute confidence in impunity? On the morning of the 18th of April, investigator Luca Davini placed a stack of bank statements from INPS on the table. Each sheet showed the same amount, transferred steadily since 2015 to Antonio R.'s account. Officially, social benefit for a school-aged child. Davini carefully tracked the dates, not a single miss. The ATM through which Antonio withdrew money was located 150 meters from his favorite Da Silvio bar. Transaction statements clearly showed. After receiving money, Antonio spent almost the entire amount right here, drinking alone or in the company of other regular customers of the establishment. With the help of bar staff, police quickly confirmed that Antonio was a frequent guest. Waiter Paolo, who had worked at Da Silvio for the last 5 years, showed terminal receipts and surveillance camera footage from 10th of April 2023. The recording showed Antonio leaving the bar at 8:53 p.m. However, after 9 p.m., the camera shut off automatically due to electrical problems. This time gap, roughly from 9 p.m. onwards, remained a dark spot in Antonio's alibi. When Antonio was summoned for questioning again, investigator Davini asked a direct question about where he was after 9 p.m. on 10th of April 2023. Antonio confidently replied that after the bar he went with friends to one of their homes to continue the evening, but named the names unconvincingly and confusedly. Davini requested addresses and contacts of the mentioned friends, but Antonio's answers appeared vague and unconvincing, as if he was trying to cover a gap in memory or possibly something else. To verify Antonio's words, police studied receipts and records from other establishments in the area, but no confirmation of his words was found. This began to create pressure on Antonio's version that he spent the evening with someone else. Investigator Davini presented Antonio with another image, a photo taken by Google Street View service in 2019. The shot clearly shows Antonio himself, standing at the window of his own bathroom and looking up at the ventilation opening through which Francesca was later discovered. The shot looked so compromising that even Antonio's lawyer was confused. However, this was only indirect evidence. Antonio explained that he was repairing the ventilation and there was no malicious intent in his actions. The false lead remained in the case materials for now, but had no evidentiary value. A day later, investigator Davini obtained another document, an ATM receipt confiscated by police from Antonio's apartment. The receipt showed date and time, 10th of April 2023, 9:15 p.m. But surprising was not only the time, but also the location of the transaction. The terminal was located 12 kilometers from the Da Silvio bar. Expert verification immediately confirmed the route logistics. From the bar to the cash withdrawal point along the SP22 highway by motorcycle could be reached in just 15 minutes. Therefore, Antonio indeed had time to reach this location immediately after leaving the bar. The thin alibi constructed by Antonio finally crumbled. Now police knew he had lied about the events of that evening. However, the window in the time schedule still allowed the assumption that he could have been at the house during the period when the video with Francesca's hand was shot. The question was not whether he could physically do this. That was already proven. Only one thing remained to be determined. Was he the only one who had access to the bathroom that evening, or was someone else involved in this story? Simultaneously, the investigation retained the version involving the deceased neighbor, Luciano S. He silently shot the video and took no action. Investigator Davini decided not to abandon this version. It was too unusual to be coincidental and too mysterious to be a simple mistake. Now the investigation had two possible directions: the living father and the silent neighbor who for unknown reasons preferred inaction. 2nd of May 2015, the deputy director of the school in Campania signs a statement about Francesca's transfer to another school. The official letter with signature M. R seems convincing. A copy of new registration is attached. The mayor's office seal looks authentic. However, if everything was so obvious and clear, why was there not a single record about the receipt of this document in the incoming correspondence log? In the school archive, the deputy director, Marco Della Valle, 10 years later holds in his hands once again that very letter. The paper has slightly yellowed. The stamp has faded. He carefully examines the signature, M. A. The handwriting is confident, familiar. The examination conducted by the police has already confirmed that it completely matches the handwriting of Maria R., Francesca's mother. Next to the letter lies a copy of a new document about registration in a neighboring region. At first glance, it looked absolutely legitimate, and only after thorough verification did the police officers notice a strange detail. The date on the City Hall stamp fell on a Sunday, a day when government institutions do not work. This indicated a crude forgery of the document. The deputy director could not explain why the forgery was not noticed back in 2015. He insisted that the documents were properly checked, but investigators easily refuted his claim. The School Journal of Incoming Correspondence, mandatory for keeping in any school in Italy, turned out to be completely empty for that period. The letter seemed to have gotten into the school from nowhere and was accepted without the slightest resistance and even without a mark of receipt. During the conversation with investigator Davini, Marco Della Valle was clearly nervous. He explained that during that period the school was experiencing an acute staff shortage. A mass of papers arrived that they physically did not have time to register. Perhaps we were not sufficiently attentive, he concluded, trying not to meet Davini's eyes. Maria R., Francesca's mother, meanwhile, found herself once again in the focus of the investigation. Her role in the story looked ambiguous. On one hand, she signed clearly forged documents. On the other hand, her motives remained a mystery. Maria had never been noticed in conflict with the school and was known as a quiet, withdrawn woman. The investigator tried to clarify this question by requesting information about her and the family from social services. The dossier turned out to be short and surprisingly superficial. The first impression was that Maria initiated the entire process of fictitious relocation. Her signature, her handwriting, her presumed participation, all this put her in the position of Antonio's accomplice. But on the same day, investigators discovered a medical certificate dated the 14th of August, 2021. From it, it became clear that Maria was undergoing treatment in a psychiatric clinic in a neighboring city. Diagnosis: severe clinical depression. The documents noted that the patient's condition was related to prolonged psychological pressure and constant fear of aggressive actions by the spouse. The certificate turned around the perception of Maria's role. Now she looked more like a victim of circumstances, a person who possibly acted under serious pressure. But this still did not give complete justification for her actions. But if the school was let down by the internal control system, and the administration thoughtlessly accepted the false letter, there remained one more key question. Why all these years, when Francesca was literally behind the wall of the neighboring house, did none of the neighbors, including the deceased Luciano S., wonder where the girl had gone, whom they saw daily in the yard? Investigator Davini was now certain that the answer to this mystery was hidden not only in the actions of the parents, but also in the indifference of the neighbors, who preferred not to notice what was happening nearby. Their silence seemed to cover the crime no worse than fake paper. Now the investigation had to study more deeply the motives of the neighbors to understand whether their choice was conscious inaction or simple human blindness. On the 12th of April 2023, 2 days after the strange video filmed by Luciano S., his niece, Julia S. arrives on Via Sant'Agata to examine the house for the first time after her uncle's death. She enters inside, opens an old wardrobe, and among dust, newspapers, and documents, discovers an abandoned Nokia 5 smartphone. The device's memory preserved a recording that she would not watch for 2 whole years. But why did Julia not give the phone to the police immediately but brought it only now? The smartphone was discovered in the far part of an old chest of drawers in a room where Luciano practically never went. The device, a Nokia 5 released in 2017, confirms technical expertise. Julia at that moment did not attach importance to the find, since the phone was discharged and there was no charging device nearby. She left it in the drawer, intending to sort through the things later when she would begin selling the house. This is exactly how the niece explained to the police officers why the device lay untouched for 2 years. Only in April 2025, beginning preparation for the sale of real estate, Julia decided to check all her uncle's property. The phone was charged, turned on, and then a video lasting 38 seconds appeared on the screen. Filming date, the 10th of April 2023. The recording time exactly coincides with that very evening when Antonio was in the Da Silvio bar. The video shows a small, weakened hand that slowly tries to reach the ventilation window of Antonio's house bathroom. File metadata confirmed the authenticity of the recording. Julia immediately handed the phone over to the police. When investigator Luca Davini asked Julia why she did not view the phone's contents immediately, the girl calmly replied, "Then I did not think. There could be something important there. Uncle was not a fan of technology. I decided it was an old and useless device." The police checked her testimony. Julia indeed did not visit the house in the period between April 2023 and the beginning of 2025, which is confirmed by neighbors, and documents from the real estate agency with which she recently concluded a contract for selling the house. Julia's testimony looked convincing. She had no close connections with either Antonio or his family. Her visits to Via Sant'Agata were rare and short. Thus, the investigation quickly removed suspicions about her direct participation in the story of Francesca's disappearance. However, investigators pondered another hypothesis. Why did Luciano, living literally next door, record the video and not show it to anyone? A version arose about possible blackmail by Luciano toward Antonio or Maria. Perhaps the neighbor demanded money for silence and died not a natural death, but was eliminated by someone. The police began looking for confirmation of this version. Luciano's bank accounts were checked. His last financial operations were studied, but nothing suspicious surfaced. He lived modestly. No large sums arrived, and Luciano himself had not been noticed in any illegal actions before. So far, this was just another lead, not confirmed by any material evidence. But the investigators' attention was soon drawn to another circumstance. The archive of forensic examination materials conducted after Luciano's death was raised. In the official conclusion, the cause of death was listed as heart attack, which was confirmed by a doctor in April 2024. However, a detail that could have completely excluded or confirmed outside interference disappeared. The toxicological analysis of Luciano's blood and tissues mysteriously vanished from the archive. The absence of such important expertise aroused Davini's suspicions about possible negligence or intentional concealment of facts by someone from the morgue or laboratory staff. This circumstance immediately turned Luciano's accidental death into an unclosed question of the investigation, leaving room for versions about external influence. Investigator Davini was certain that this episode would necessarily return to the investigation, but for now he had no concrete evidence of violent death of the neighbor. On the other hand, the new evidence, the video, already played a significant role in this case. It showed not just the fact of Francesca's existence in Antonio's bathroom, but also that at least one neighbor knew about this 2 years ago, and possibly not only he alone. The police's next actions were obvious. Carefully study Antonio's family financial situation, check any possible money flows that could shed light on the motives and actions of the environment. The investigation had to understand who among the neighbors might have still known or at least suspected, and why, over the course of 8 long years, not a single person was found who would speak aloud about what was happening literally behind the wall of their own house. On the 22nd of April 2025, the police obtained data about a second bank account belonging to Antonio. The account was registered to the firm ANT, Rossi Costruzioni, created in 2016. Officially, it was engaged in finishing work, but no one could find documents about the company's registration. This account was replenished monthly by exactly €450, an amount that exactly matched the benefit received in Francesca's name. Now the police had to understand whether this was just a way of cashing money or whether Antonio really conducted underground business. Financial expertise quickly established that the bank account named ANT, Rossi Costruzioni, was opened in a small branch of a bank in a neighboring town. In the documents for opening the account, Antonio's signature appeared. Despite the name, the company had no official registration, which was confirmed by the tax inspection. At the same time, money came in steadily, every month, starting from 2016. When investigator Luca Davini directly asked Antonio about the purpose of the account, he calmly and confidently answered, "This is my business account. Everything is transparent there." But the transparency was in question when the tax service found no records of such a company. Antonio could not explain the absence of registration, referring only to the fact that he did not understand legal subtleties. This explanation looked extremely doubtful, considering the regular receipts to the account and the absence of tax declarations. Meanwhile, journalists interested in the high-profile case conducted their own investigation. They found old advertisements on the network on behalf of Antonio for apartment repairs and finishing work. At first glance, all this looked like a cover, but the police decided to double-check this information. 3 people confirmed that they had indeed used Antonio's services. One of the clients, Giovanni N., told in detail that Antonio performed kitchen and bathroom repair work in his apartment in the autumn of 2020. The second, Alessandro P., noted that the repair by Antonio was done with quality and on time, and even provided a copy of the payment receipt for services. The third client, Franco T., confirmed the performance of minor work and remembered that Antonio seemed slightly withdrawn to him, but proved himself reliable in work. These testimonies put the investigators at an impasse. The account company turned out to be not entirely fictitious. Antonio really provided services, albeit unofficially. The version about simple cashing out of benefits became less obvious, although it was not completely discarded. However, on the night of the 22nd of April, the police received unexpected testimony that again cast suspicion on Antonio. The second client, Alessandro, remembered and stated that once he saw Antonio late at night, around 3 o'clock, near his own house. He was pulling a heavy bag of cement out of his car. This memory caused interest, since the nighttime clearly was not suitable for conducting any repair work. Antonio explained this by the fact that he allegedly bought cement during the day, but forgot to unload it on time. However, the version itself looked unconvincing. Why exactly at night was it necessary to pull out a heavy bag? The police immediately thought that the cement could be used not for simple repair, but for more serious construction changes inside the house, possibly related to strengthening doors or bathroom walls. It was precisely this detail that gave investigator Davini grounds to immediately authorize a more detailed inspection of Antonio's house. The police assumed that the cement was used to strengthen the structure of the room where Francesca was later found. The chain found inside the bathroom was fixed to the wall with an anchor, but the initial examination did not specify whether work was carried out to strengthen doors or walls. Now experts had to re-examine the internal structure of the room, especially areas near the door and the wall to which the chain was attached. The investigation intended to find traces of recent concreting or other changes that could confirm the version of deliberate strengthening of the place where Francesca was held. Much depended on the results of the inspection. If strengthening is proven, This will significantly aggravate the charges against Antonio and open additional motives for his actions. Details of the night incident that the client remembered unexpectedly brought the investigation closer to a new turn in uncovering the mystery of Via Sant'Agata. This meant that now the police approached understanding what exactly was happening behind the walls of Antonio's house in those years when Francesca was considered missing. On the 14th of September 2019, Antonio's family gathered for the baptism of his nephew, an event that became the subject of close attention of the investigation. In the holiday photographs were Antonio, his wife Maria, numerous relatives, and a large cake with one additional candle for her. But Francesca herself was not in the photographs. None of the relatives paid attention to her absence, or did not want to pay attention. Police experts carefully studied the photographs seized from the family. The faces in the pictures smiled, seemed satisfied, and absolutely calm. The cake decorated with an additional candle was supposed to symbolize Francesca's presence, but this looked more like a ritual, a formal gesture. The police noticed that no one was looking at the empty place intended for her. Everyone was absorbed in their own conversations and feast. Investigators questioned relatives who were at the celebration. Everyone answered approximately the same thing. We were told that she was sick, and we did not want to disturb. The most interesting turned out to be the testimony of the aunt, Elisa R., Antonio's sister. It was she who at the celebration actively emphasized that Francesca was sick and calmed those who asked about her. Investigator Luca Davini met with the photographer who shot the baptism. The photographer remembered that no one asked questions about the girl aloud. Moreover, he mentioned in his testimony that he had not seen her at family events for several years already. He had been familiar with the family for many years and could not understand why she suddenly disappeared from view. To Davini's question, why he himself did not ask the family, the photographer answered that he was used to not interfering in clients' personal affairs. This was another confirmation that the family's environment preferred not to notice the obvious. Even strangers observed the unspoken rule of silence. Aunt Elisa came under the close attention of the police. It was she who became the person who most actively and convincingly explained to everyone Francesca's absence. In her words, the investigation sensed possible intentional concealment of the truth. Her explanation seemed too prepared, too smooth and pre-planned. However, the police had no direct evidence of her involvement. Therefore, investigators requested permission to check her personal correspondence, which should shed light on her true role in this story. During the check of digital data, the police managed to partially restore the correspondence of the family WhatsApp chat. In the correspondence, a message from Aunt Elisa was found. "I'll bring her a gift later." The date of sending the message coincided with the day of the baptism. The message itself was set for automatic deletion, which immediately alerted the experts. Now it was necessary to find out what else could be hidden in the deleted messages and why such secrecy was needed at all. The police could not yet say for certain whether the message was an ordinary gesture or Elisa really knew much more than she said aloud. Digital forensics had to reveal the true meaning of these words to understand whether this was an attempt to preserve the appearance of normalcy or hide a more serious secret. The environment of Antonio and Maria began to look increasingly ambiguous. Relatives demonstrated complete indifference to Francesca's fate, as if her absence had become normal for them. All of them seemed to silently agree not to notice what was happening in their own family. Now the investigation had to find out whether the family was collectively blind and naive, or still consciously covered up a terrible secret. And the key to this could be the deleted messages that the police had already begun to restore. The photographs from the baptism became a symbol of how easily the closest people are capable of ignoring the obvious, creating an appearance of normalcy even when it is absolutely impossible. On the 25th of April 2025, investigator Luca Davini received the long-awaited documents from the ASL Medical Archive. The case concerned the missing toxicological analysis of Luciano, Antonio's neighbor. The archive confirmed that blood samples for analysis were received by the laboratory on the 13th of April, 2023. 3 days after recording the strange video. But in the result column, there was emptiness. Could one believe that the most important analysis disappeared from the laboratory by accident? Or did someone try to remove the results intentionally? When studying the laboratory documentation, Davini's attention was immediately drawn to one detail. The medical technician responsible for conducting the analysis quit exactly 1 month after the disappearance of the results. The work record showed dismissal at his own request. This seemed like a suspicious coincidence, especially since the technician, Francesco D., had worked in the laboratory for more than 10 years and enjoyed a good reputation. When the police interrogated the technician, his testimony turned out to be confusing and contradictory. Francesco claimed that the blood sample evaporated. That's exactly how he literally expressed it. And that this was probably a technical error. But the laboratory journal, where all actions with samples were recorded, clearly indicated the opposite. The records confirmed receipt and the beginning of analysis. Moreover, the time of placing the sample in the refrigeration chamber was also noted, which could not have led to evaporation in any way. The investigation, trying to understand whether Francesco D's actions were the result of simple negligence or intentional action, checked his financial operations and phone calls. One of the main versions became the possible participation of Antonio in the disappearance of the toxicological analysis through bribing the technician. However, the police quickly faced a problem. No financial transfers from Antonio to the technician were discovered, nor were there suspicious calls between them. Nevertheless, this version was still too promising to discard. Therefore, the investigation continued checking other channels of possible interaction, including correspondence and personal contacts of the technician. Soon information appeared on the network that Francesco D. allegedly received a large sum of money for concealing the analysis results. The news spread quickly, causing resonance among journalists and the public. However, financial expertise did not confirm either money coming into Francesco's accounts or large expenses that could indicate the presence of hidden funds. Rumors remained rumors, but the police could not completely exclude the version of bribery or pressure. Francesco D. continued to insist on his innocence, repeating about a technical error in the laboratory, although he could not explain in detail how such an error could have occurred. The situation changed sharply when digital forensic specialists found in Francesco D's mail a letter sent to him by Antonio's lawyer. The electronic message, forwarded from the official address of the law firm, had the subject Preventivo Difesa, cost of services. Inside the letter, some price for undefined services was briefly discussed, which the lawyer intended to coordinate personally. The very fact of correspondence between Antonio's family lawyer and the medical technician turned out to be an alarming signal. This was not yet direct evidence of bribery, but gave grounds to think that the parties were discussing precisely monetary issues. However, the investigation did not have evidence of the fact of money transfer. Perhaps it never came to actual payment, and Francesco D. might have simply been frightened by possible consequences. Now the investigation sharply turned toward the finances of the lawyer himself and his relationship with Antonio. The police had to find out whether Antonio had means to bribe the technician and whether the lawyer could have played a decisive role in the disappearance of the toxicological analysis. At the same time, the version of an accidental laboratory error still remained, but looked increasingly unlikely. The missing toxicology data of Luciano S. could confirm or refute the possibility of his violent death. The disappearance of this document was now perceived by investigators as intentional distortion of facts, committed in someone's interests. At this moment, the investigation could confidently say only one thing. Antonio's lawyer contacted the medical technician precisely during the period of conducting the analysis, but it remained unclear whether this was about an actual attempt at bribery or everything was limited only to preliminary negotiations. Financial verification of the lawyer and his client became the next step of the investigation, to finally understand the story with the missing analysis. And until then, the question of what actually happened in the ASL laboratory on April 13, 2023, continued to remain unanswered. On April 28, 2025, forensic experts again entered Antonio's house on Via Sant'Agata. The bathroom where Francesca was discovered became the center of their attention. The initial inspection missed one important detail. The door of the room was reinforced with a steel frame from the inside. The investigation had suspicions that this was not done without reason. Why did Antonio need to turn an ordinary bathroom into something resembling a bunker? The construction expert invited by the police quickly established that the steel frame was installed around 2018. And then, already in April 2023, the construction was additionally reinforced with fresh cement. Steel and cement formed a structure that practically did not yield to ordinary efforts and was designed for long-term detention. The specialist clarified that the weight of the steel frame was 32 kilograms, and it could have been easily delivered to the location using the compact Fiat Panda car that Antonio used. Logistics verification confirmed. Such weight and size of cargo quite fit in this car. When Antonio was called for another interrogation, investigator Luca Davini asked him a direct question about the purpose of installing the steel frame. Antonio, without embarrassment, stated that he allegedly installed it for protection from mold spread, which often appeared in the house. But the construction expert categorically rejected this explanation, calling it nonsense. The expert explained that metal constructions only worsen ventilation and increase humidity. Thus, Antonio's justification looked not just doubtful, but frankly absurd. The investigation considered another version. Antonio might not have installed this frame himself, but turned to an unknown craftsman. The police checked local construction companies and individual entrepreneurs, but none of them confirmed the fact of performing such work at Antonio's house. Receipts or other financial confirmations of these services were also not found. The version remained without evidence for now. However, the police could not completely discard this version, since the probability that someone else helped Antonio in creating the reinforcement was still great. Identifying this person was not possible until additional evidence would be found. The key moment was a repeated, thorough inspection of the cement coating near the metal frame. The expert noticed a small protruding edge of paper pressed into the cement. The carefully extracted fragment turned out to be a piece of a local newspaper. The date on the fragment was clearly readable: April 11th, 2023. This was just one day before the moment when Francesca's weakened hand appeared on the video shot by neighbor Luciano. This finding formed a chain that looked too consistent to consider it coincidental. First, the video recording with the hand, and the next day, urgent work with cement, clearly aimed at reinforcing the door construction. It seems someone hastily tried to eliminate any possibilities for escape or discovery of Francesca. For now, the police refrained from final conclusions. It could not be unambiguously stated that it was precisely Antonio who installed this cement, although everything pointed precisely to him. It was necessary to check who exactly purchased cement on April 11th, 2023. This person could be the key to the solution. At this stage of the investigation, one thing became obvious. The events of April 10th and 11th, 2023 were critically important. And probably, the video recording made by neighbor Luciano caused urgent necessity in reinforcing the door. Antonio, or whoever acted together with him, clearly hurried to hide or prevent the possibility of revealing the secret. The investigation continued. Investigators were confident that a receipt for cement purchase or witness testimony would provide necessary information in the coming days. The investigation now knew for certain. The bathroom door was reinforced specifically to keep Francesca inside, and no other explanations withstood criticism. Now the question came down to who exactly and when made the decision about additional strengthening of the construction. The events of that day gave police a clear guideline for further actions. Only one thing the investigation could confirm now for certain. The fresh cement was a hasty attempt by someone to hide traces or forever eliminate the possibility of Francesca's escape from her captivity. On May 2nd, 2025, experts finally restored deleted messages from the family WhatsApp chat that Francesca's aunt Elisa desperately tried to hide. On the surface appeared a single message sent to Maria in March 2021. "Can't cover anymore. Tell about it." It became clear that the secret the family preferred to keep silent about was known not only to the parents, but also to other relatives. The question was what exactly the aunt was hiding, and why her silence lasted so long. The restored message gave police a clear indication that Aunt Elisa knew much more than she had said earlier. The date of the message, March 3rd, 2021, spoke for itself. At that moment, Francesca had already been officially considered transferred to another school for 6 years, although she was actually in complete isolation in Antonio's house. When investigator Luca Davini called Maria for testimony, the woman looked completely suppressed. Her answer sounded short and painful. "I asked for help, but Antonio threatened." With these words began a deeper analysis of what was happening inside the family, revealing a multi-year system of pressure, threats, and financial control from Antonio's side. To the question of why Maria did not report what was happening to the police, she answered that she feared for her life and the lives of her loved ones. However, Maria's words contradicted what was known about the aunt's actions. Eliza clearly tried to provide support and even insisted on revealing the secret. But after her report, nothing changed. The aunt preferred to remain silent and keep the family's secret hidden. The prosecutor's office considered the possibility of charging Eliza with failure to report. However, the statute of limitations for this violation was almost exhausted. Law enforcement agencies found themselves facing a moral dilemma. It was obvious that the relatives knew, but consciously chose to remain silent, hiding the heavy truth behind the wall of the family home. Financial transfers from Eliza to Maria came under suspicion, which the investigation discovered during the verification process. A Western Union transfer receipt was found, confirming that the aunt periodically transferred Maria the sum of €300 with the note, "For medicine." Initially, this seemed like support in a difficult situation. However, financial analysis showed that the funds were immediately withdrawn by Antonio himself on the day they arrived. This fact made the police wonder whether Eliza was part of a financial scheme that allowed Antonio to control the entire family. However, neither direct evidence of Eliza's participation in the machinations nor her conscious cooperation with Antonio was found. The money could have indeed been intended for Maria, who was in a hopeless situation, but ended up with Antonio against Eliza's own will. Financial experts made another important conclusion. The sum of €300 was transferred regularly and flowed into the general money stream that Antonio controlled. Funds received as child benefits and transfers from relatives converged at one point, the ATM at the bar da Silvio. Thus, a clear picture of the financial motivation behind Antonio's actions emerged. Money intended for Francesca's support and family assistance was spent exclusively by him and went to personal expenses, mainly alcohol. The family, which had long maintained silence, now found itself faced with the fact that they not only turned a blind eye to what was happening, but essentially indirectly supported the scheme created by Antonio. Even attempts by individual family members to help Maria were unsuccessful due to Antonio's total financial and psychological control. The police clearly understood that the silence and inaction of relatives became one of the main factors that allowed Antonio to keep Francesca in captivity for so long. At the same time, formally each family member could justify themselves by not knowing the entire situation completely. However, messages in the chat testified to the contrary. They understood enough to realize the seriousness of what was happening. The next step for the investigation was complete immersion in the family's financial flows, including checking transfers made in favor of Antonio by the lawyer, relatives, and other persons, to finally confirm the financial motive in this story. The story of the family's silence and the role of each of its members remained open, preserving a heavy moral question. How far are close people willing to go in their inaction before the truth comes to light? On the 8th of May 2025, forensic experts completed DNA analysis of evidence found in Antonio's house on Via Sant'Agata. The question stood direct and clear. Would the DNA traces discovered on the chain in the bathroom match the prints found on construction gloves covered with cement, discovered in the shed behind the house? For the first time in the entire investigation, the police had the opportunity to directly link Antonio to Francesca's place of confinement. The examination results were obtained in the morning. On the chain to which Francesca was chained, they found not only traces of her blood and epithelium, but also fingerprints of an adult person. These prints turned out to be partially suitable for identification. At the same time, in the old shed behind the house, police found a pair of gloves stained with cement. The gloves were immediately sent to the laboratory for examination. The result proved eloquent. Antonio's DNA was found on the inner surface of the gloves. The cement traces matched in composition with samples taken from the reinforced bathroom door. Antonio's lawyer immediately issued a statement, noting that construction gloves are standard work equipment that his client used at numerous construction sites. However, the investigation pointed to an important detail. The cement was of a specific and rare brand that was sold in only one place, the local Leroy Merlin store. The receipt and purchase date coincided with the day of the 10th of April 2023, a key moment in the case. The police questioned the store cashier. The woman confirmed the cement sale and remembered an important detail. The buyer was a man with a scar on his left arm. Investigators quickly found out that such a scar indeed belonged to Antonio. However, exactly the same scar was also on one of the employees of the local hospital, who had not previously figured in the investigation at all. The version of a possible alternative buyer immediately attracted police attention. Forensic experts studied the biography and alibi of the hospital worker. It turned out that he was on duty on the day the cement was purchased, but the exact time of his break was unclear. Checking his bank accounts and contacts revealed no connection with Antonio's family or this case. Nevertheless, the police could not completely exclude him from suspects until obtaining the complete picture of events. The main turning point of the day was the video recording from the Leroy Merlin store's surveillance camera. The image quality allowed seeing the buyer's figure clearly: height, gait, and even mannerisms. However, the person's face was reliably hidden by a hood. Expert gait analysis gave a result: 70% match with Antonio. This was enough to cause serious suspicion, but was not 100% proof. The recording frames were viewed again and again in the police conference room. Despite the clear feeling that it was indeed Antonio on the video, formally a certain percentage of doubt remained. These 30% of uncertainty could play a decisive role in court, threatening the entire chain of evidence collected. The investigation had too little time left to eliminate these doubts, and yet there was firm confidence. The cement was purchased by the same person whose prints and DNA were found in Antonio's house. The gloves with cement, traces on the chain, and the figure on the store camera recording formed a rigid chain of circumstantial evidence that was difficult to ignore even in the absence of absolute certainty. Now the fate of the case passed into the hands of the court. Investigators prepared materials including detailed expert conclusions and witness testimony. The question of Antonio's guilt was to be decided in the coming weeks. It was only important to understand whether these 70% of similarity would be enough to convince the court, or whether Antonio's lawyer would manage to use the remaining 30% of doubt in his favor. At this stage, the investigation had exhausted its possibilities. Only the last instance remained, in which the final decision would be made about who exactly bought the cement, reinforced the bathroom door, and created all the conditions for Francesca's multi-year isolation. The fate of the family and the weight of relatives' silence were now completely open to society and awaited their finale in the courtroom. On the 12th of June 2025, the courtroom in Campania filled with muffled whispers when the judge read the final decision. A few minutes before this, Antonio silently looked ahead, avoiding the glances of relatives and journalists. His wife Maria sat motionless, her hands noticeably trembling. Aunt Eliza, on the contrary, looked determined and focused, All present understood that in the next minutes, the secret that had been hidden behind the bathroom door of the house on Via Sant'Agata for almost 10 years would be revealed. The judge pronounced the main words: guilty of unlawful deprivation of liberty and cruel treatment. Antonio heard the verdict with an empty gaze. However, suddenly his face contorted with anger. He sharply rose and rushed toward Maria, but was immediately stopped by Carabinieri, who held him by the shoulders. Complete silence momentarily fell in the hall. The investigation, which lasted several months, completely revealed the mechanics of what had happened. Antonio consciously isolated Francesca with the purpose of obtaining a stable financial flow in the form of state benefits and periodic transfers from relatives. All these funds went to personal expenses, predominantly alcohol. Every step by Antonio was thought out and methodical. Forged documents about transfer to another school allowed him to create an illusion of normality and avoid social services checks. The key evidence became the video shot by neighbor Luciano. His sudden death gave rise to a separate mystery connected with the disappeared toxicological analysis. The court considered proven the fact of intentional concealment of this data, which strengthened suspicions of Antonio's attempt to cover his tracks. The disappearance of the analysis was qualified by the court precisely as intent to conceal. Evidence of direct bribery of the laboratory technician was not presented, but the fact of correspondence with Antonio's lawyer played its role. The chain on which Francesca was held and the steel frame with cement that reinforced the bathroom door became central evidence. DNA examination confirmed the presence of Antonio's prints on objects connected with holding Francesca. The recording from the Leroy Merlin store camera, although it did not give 100% certainty, was recognized as sufficient indirect confirmation of his involvement in purchasing cement and organizing the conditions of confinement. During the trial, the testimonies of Maria and Aunt Eliza finally put everything in its place. Maria told in detail about the constant threats from Antonio and complete control over her finances and movements. The aunt confirmed that she tried to intervene but was paralyzed by fear of destroying family relationships and facing Antonio's threats personally. The court separately noted the fact that the family, including Maria and the aunt, knew about what was happening and continued to remain silent for several years. Their silence became yet another tragic element in Francesca's story. Antonio was sentenced to 25 years of imprisonment. The court found him fully responsible for the cruelty and methodical nature of the crime. Maria received 5 years of conditional sentence with mandatory completion of treatment course for clinical depression and restoration of psychological condition. The court recognized her indirect guilt in failure to report and complicity under coercion, which mitigated the punishment. Francesca, finally freed from years-long confinement, was placed under the care of the social service Tutela Minori. Specialists began work on her rehabilitation and gradual return to normal life. In the time from 1997 to 2004, 82 people mysteriously disappeared in the small Polish city of Łódź. They did not know each other and had no common connections. Their disappearances were attributed by the investigation for a long time to coincidences, migration, and domestic reasons. But one day, a sack with burned human bones was found in the forest. Then the investigators thought for the first time that all these cases could be the work of one person. On the morning of the 17th of March 2004, the forest Łagiewniki looked as usual. Silence, moist air, traces of night rain on the ground. Nothing unusual. However, here, not far from the path, Ewa Lis, a local resident, found a heavy black sack that was partially buried in the earth. Her first reaction was to call the police. The find looked too suspicious. The investigators who arrived carefully pulled it to the surface and opened it, discovering inside what became the starting point for one of the strangest investigations in Polish criminal chronicles. The sack contained human bones, partially burned and cleaned of soft tissues. Even experienced criminal technicians who were accustomed to many things were shocked by what they saw. The absence of soft tissues on the remains testified to something very specific and extremely rare, even by the standards of serious crimes. The sack contained no personal items, clothing, or documents, but the criminal technicians were able to determine the victim's identity based on dental remains. It turned out to be a 32-year-old man who had disappeared about half a year earlier, in September 2003. The experts quickly noticed unusual details. The sack itself belonged to a rare industrial type of the brand F. In Łódź, such goods were bought in only one place, in a large wholesale warehouse that served several dozen local enterprises. This significantly narrowed the search circle. When examining the remains, the specialists noticed another peculiarity. Clear traces of a fine, serrated tool were visible on the bones. Meanwhile, the police began questioning the residents of the nearest houses and cottages and trying to collect at least some clues. Ewalis reported that she had heard a strange engine noise the night before discovering the find. The car was old, possibly of Polish manufacture, ran for a long time, with headlights turned off. This confirmed the investigators' suspicions that the perpetrator acted at night and wanted to remain unnoticed. The investigators began checking everyone who had access to the forest and could come unnoticed at night. The first on the list was Janusz Nowak, the forester. A middle-aged man, secretive, unsociable, but without previous problems with the law. He had keys to all barriers and gates, and thus the opportunity to drive quietly into the forest. The second suspect appeared almost immediately after the first, Piotr Lewicki, a man with a criminal record and difficult biography. He often spent nights in an abandoned forest hut, not far from the place where the remains were discovered. The local police knew him. Lewicki had been caught more than once in petty thefts and illegal hunting. Access to the forest was free for him, albeit unofficial. At first glance, Janusz Nowak fit ideally into the role of the perpetrator. The car matched, access to the forest was open, and the strange character only reinforced the suspicions. The investigators were certain that he was hiding something. Nowak was arrested and interrogated. He spoke little, denied his involvement, and could not explain why his car had been seen in the forest on the night of the crime. It seemed as if the police had caught the right man, but very soon, the experts refuted this. When the forensic doctors finished analyzing the remains, a new fact emerged that completely changed the course of the investigation. An abnormally high concentration of diazepam was discovered in the victim's bone marrow, a medical preparation that is normally used for sedation or putting to sleep. This meant that the person had been incapacitated before the most terrible thing happened to them. Such preparations could not be bought without a prescription. The investigators checked Janusz Nowak's medical records. He could not officially obtain diazepam, and illegal channels were not found. The police were forced to release Janusz Nowak and reconsider the original conclusions. Now, the investigation's attention turned to the pharmacies. The investigators requested the dispensing journal for prescription medications, hoping to identify the person who had obtained the preparation for the crime. And only now did they think to check whether they had not overlooked similar cases earlier. Soon it became clear that the disappearances had begun much earlier, and the number of missing persons was much larger than they had initially assumed. Here, the investigation finally realized that they were not dealing with an isolated case, but with something much larger and more terrible. And this was only the tip of the iceberg. Janusz Nowak, the forester, continued to insist on his alibi. On the night from the 16th to the 17th of March, he was nowhere away from home. However, during the investigation, contradictions were discovered that called into question the truthfulness of his statements. On the evening of the 20th of March, the investigation group came again to Nowak's house to verify the statements and examine additional documents. The forester's house lay deep in the village, far from the main road. On the property, it was quiet. There were no superfluous witnesses. The place seemed ideal to hide something important. Janusz calmly let the officers in and showed confidence in his correctness. However, Nowak's calm was disturbed when the investigators presented him with the Journal of Nighttime Forest Patrols. According to the records, on the 16th of March at 22:35, there is Nowak's own signature regarding departure for night patrol in the forest area. This detail clearly contradicted his words that he had stayed home that night. Nowak studied the journal attentively but could not explain this entry comprehensibly. He claimed that he remembered the night very clearly and that there had been no patrol. The next piece of evidence surfaced when visiting the fuel depot, which was located on the edge of the village, about 5 kilometers from Nowak's house. The duty guard, an old man, insisted that exactly on the evening of the 16th of March, at about 23:05, a car without license plates had driven onto the depot. The watch journal recorded, "Car without plates, make not entered." However, the guard clearly described the car, an old dark green Polonaise. This detail again pointed to Forrester Nowak. When the investigators again turned to Nowak for explanations, he told them that he really had driven out that night, but exclusively out of official necessity. According to his words, he brought expired gasoline for disposal to free the depot for new deliveries. However, the investigators discovered no write-off documents for fuel that would confirm these words. The absence of documentation aroused serious doubts about the truthfulness of his statements. Nowak's words sounded credible, but remained without documentary confirmation as mere empty claims. To check all possible access routes to diazepam, the investigators directed their attention to Janusz's wife, Anna Nowak. The woman worked in a veterinary clinic where this preparation was regularly used for medical procedures on animals. It seemed that exactly here could be the source of that diazepam that the experts had discovered. The police went there to check the presence of the preparations and document a possible theft. However, the director of the veterinary clinic quickly dispelled the suspicions. He personally showed the investigators the safe where the diazepam was kept. The safe had not been opened since 2002. The lock had an intact factory seal with corresponding marking and stamp of the control authorities. This excluded the possibility of theft of the preparation at the veterinary clinic. Despite the revealed contradictions and the absence of documents for the written-off gasoline, the police did not arrest Janusz Nowak. The investigation decided on caution and did not want to rush with conclusions. It was decided to monitor the Forester around the clock. Nowak continued to live his usual life, unaware that every one of his steps was being documented by investigators. The investigators were already moving to the next phase of work. They analyzed the data obtained from pharmacies about prescription medications and tried to determine the source of the diazepam that had been found in the bone marrow of Tomasz Bednarczyk. This was a laborious process that required much time but was necessary to exclude all coincidences and reach the correct conclusion. The situation became increasingly complicated. The investigation shifted focus to the financial side of the life of Tomasz Bednarczyk, whose remains were discovered in the forest Łagiewniki. His sister Anna Czaplinska, a 29-year-old employee of the accounting department of a company in Łódź, mentioned a strange loan that Tomasz had taken out shortly before his disappearance. Officially, the money was intended for apartment renovation, but she claimed that her brother had no intention of doing any renovation. The investigators checked the sister's words and requested bank documents. The statement showed that Tomasz had received a sum of 18,000 zloty in cash only 2 days before his disappearance. The transaction was conducted at the bank through a teller and not through an ATM, which indicated the victim's desire not to leave electronic traces. The bank employee who was responsible for dispensing the funds could remember the customer. According to his words, Tomasz did not come alone but with a companion, a stocky man, about 30 years old, in a dark windbreaker with a conspicuous car emblem on the chest. The investigators brought the bank employee photos of several men, but he recognized none of those presented. The man in the windbreaker was unknown to the bank employee, which added uncertainty to the circumstances of the money withdrawal. To clarify the purpose of the loan, the investigation again questioned Tomasz's sister, Anna Czaplinska. Anna explained with certainty that her brother had never told her about plans to renovate the apartment. On the contrary, Shortly before his disappearance, he discussed with her financial problems and lack of money for current expenses. Initially, the investigators suspected that Tomasz might have needed the money to repay a large debt to a criminal loan shark. This version seemed plausible, especially given the fact that Tomasz obviously concealed the true purpose of the loan and, according to his sister, was nervous for several days before his disappearance. The investigators conducted a conversation with one of the underworld lenders of Łódź, who had a wide network of clients and the reputation of an extremely cruel man who forgave no delays. The loan shark calmly showed his debtor book. In it, strangely, the name Tomasz Bednarczyk was not found at all. The loan shark remarked that a man with this name had never approached him. At the same time, the investigators accidentally saw strange initials AK in the records, which were highlighted in special color and appeared on several pages. The investigator who led the questioning of the loan shark remembered the bank teller's statements. The badge on the windbreaker of the man accompanying Tomasz could be related to an automobile community. The investigation found that in Łódź there actually existed a fairly well-known auto club called Łódź Classic Cars, whose members wore club attributes, including windbreakers with car emblems. During a superficial check of the club, the police quickly determined that among its participants were people with various biographies, from wealthy collectors to persons with criminal backgrounds. Now, the investigation seriously considered the possibility of a connection between Tomasz's disappearance and someone from the club participants, although the identity of the owner of the initials AK had not yet been established. The next stage of the investigation shifted toward the auto club Łódź Classic Cars. Dozens of club participants now had to be checked separately. Who could be hiding under the initials AK? Who could be that man in the windbreaker who accompanied Tomasz Bednarczyk in the bank and for whom the withdrawn cash was actually intended? Meanwhile, the police did not stop analyzing the pharmacy journal and continued parallel surveillance of the forester Janusz Nowak, who remained under suspicion. However, one thing was now clear. Tomasz's disappearance was anything but accidental, and obviously someone from his circle or a new person not yet appeared in the case was involved. On the 30th of March 2004, the forest again became the subject of close police attention. A young forester's assistant, who was checking the condition of forest plantations after heavy rains, accidentally stumbled upon another strange object, a black sack hidden under an old fallen tree. He did not dare to open it himself and immediately called the police. The arriving investigators confirmed the worst expectations. In the sack, bone fragments belonging to several people were discovered. The criminal experts quickly established that the remains belonged to at least 3 different people. It immediately became obvious that the investigation was not dealing with a single episode, but with a series of interconnected disappearances and murders. Among the found remains, the police also discovered important evidence: a small kitchen towel with neat embroidery and the initials AK. The towel was stained with greasy spots and looked as if it had been hastily taken by someone from a house or a place where cooking was done regularly. To determine the origin of the found object, the investigation invited a textile expert for consultation, who, after thorough examination of the material and embroidery style, concluded that the towel was mass-produced for the Tesco Łódź retail chain. According to information from the stores, the batch of towels with similar embroidery only went on sale in 2003, less than a year ago. Consequently, the towel was not purchased long ago, and its owner could be directly connected to the crimes. The investigators immediately went to the local hypermarket Tesco Łódź to try to find out who could have bought this towel. However, it turned out that a similar batch of goods was sold without personal buyer registration through cash registers with cash payment. Meanwhile, the investigation received a new witness, a 38-year-old angler who often spent nights at a small lake located about 1 kilometer from the Łagiewniki forest massif, reported to the police that on the night before the discovery of the first find, he had seen a suspicious car. He remembered details: a white Fiat 125P that was driving very slowly and with headlights turned off. The witness could not name the exact license plate, but remembered well the make and model of the car. The investigators took this information seriously as it corresponded in character to the statements of the previous witness, who had mentioned another car that was also driving at night without lights. The police organized a check of all owners of white cars of the Fiat 125P brand registered in Łódź and the nearest settlements. The investigators conducted dozens of interrogations, but none of the checked owners could be connected to the events in the forest. Meanwhile, the criminal laboratory finished examining the found remains and came to an important conclusion. According to the analysis results, the death date of all 3 victims was 3 to 8 months. This fact meant that the murderer continued to act until recently and was probably still in close proximity to the crime scene. This information disturbed the investigators. They understood that they were dealing with a serial killer who did not stop his actions despite the increased police interest in the forest and surrounding area. The investigation strengthened security measures and began working with even greater intensity, understanding that preventing new crimes now directly depended on the speed of the investigation. Now the key direction of the investigation became the re-examination of recently acquired diazepam batches. On the 5th of April, the investigation returned again to Piotr Lewicki, the previously convicted man who lived on the outskirts of Łódź and was known to the police for his frequent overnight stays in the forest hut Łagiewniki. It was his name that often appeared in documents connected to the forest. The suspicions intensified again when it became known that Lewicki had been seen in the vicinity exactly on the night from the 16th to the 17th of March. The investigators came to Lewicki's workplace, the PKP cargo railway station where he officially worked the night shift. Lewicki met the police calmly, did not try to avoid the conversation, and immediately showed the night shift schedule. On the document were his signature, the section master's note, and the office time clock stamp that recorded the exact time of shift beginning and end. The shift lasted from 22 to 6 o'clock and completely covered the time of the first find's discovery. However, the investigators decided to play it safe, understanding Lewicki's personality, and obtained official permission to search his forest hut. In the hut, small and dilapidated, the police discovered a number of suspicious objects. Several sharp knives of various sizes, a whetstone, and a collection of hunting trophies, animal pelts, and antlers. The situation became complicated again and made the investigators think about Lewicki's role in what had happened. The investigators sent the found knives to the criminal laboratory for expertise. It was extremely important to establish whether these tools were used for work with the previously found remains. The analysis results were obtained the next day. On the surface of the knives, only microparticles of pork fat and traces of normal domestic use were discovered. While the expertise was checking the knives, the police received the final results regarding the Fiat 125P car that the angler had seen earlier. The owner of the car turned out to be a 72-year-old retiree from a suburb of Łódź who had an impeccable alibi. Exactly on that night, the man was in the city hospital for treatment. This was confirmed by hospital documents with the medical institution's stamp, which completely excluded the possibility of his involvement. Thus, the version with the Fiat 125P was officially closed. It seemed as if the investigation had again reached a dead end. But unexpectedly, a new important witness appeared. The guard of the PKP cargo station, who worked the same night. In conversation with the investigators, he remembered an interesting detail. Late in the evening, around 21:40, an acquaintance brought Lewicki to the station in an old Polonaise brand car that was missing license plates. The guard described the driver, a stocky man of medium height, strong build. The description matched perfectly with the one given earlier by the bank teller, who had seen the unknown man who accompanied Tomasz Bednarczyk when withdrawing a large sum of cash. This information immediately made the police change priorities. If Lewicki himself was confirmed by witnesses, then the identity of the Polonaise driver came to the forefront again. The police decided to return to the members of the Łódź Classic Cars Auto Club, where, according to available information, the owner of the old green Polonaise without license plates might be listed. The investigation strengthened control over all club participants, checking their biographies and movements in recent months, paying particularly close attention to possible connections to diazepam and missing persons. On the 8th of April, the investigation finally shifted attention to the Łódź Classic Cars Auto Club, which was located in a small building not far from the center of Łódź. When checking the lists of recently joined club members, the police came across an entry that had been made just a few months earlier. A new person had joined the club, a certain Alexander K., owner of an old green Polonaise car without license plates. The information immediately interested the investigators, especially given the recurring initials AK in the case. Examination of the club's registration card quickly revealed details that had long remained a puzzle for the investigation. Behind the initials AK was hiding Andrzej Kowalski, born 1971, resident of Marchewski Street in the Retkinia district. He was registered as the owner of that car that appeared so often in witness statements and had been noticed near Piotr Lewicki and Tomasz Bednarczyk. The police officers went to Marchewski Street to question neighbors and obtain additional information about Kowalski. The picture proved to be disturbing. The neighbors told without particular hesitation that Kowalski led a secretive lifestyle, often left his house at late hours, and only returned in the morning. They also mentioned an unusual smell of chemicals from his garage and noted that Kowalski always carefully locked it, avoiding conversations about his car and the items stored in it. The investigation met with the club chairman to clarify the schedule of events that Kowalski could have participated in. The club leader told that on the 16th of March, all club members participated in a technical seminar that began at 7 o'clock and ended around 9:30. Kowalski was indeed present at the seminar, but left earlier than the others, around 9:30 in the evening. Thus, the suspect had an open time window, sufficient to leave the club and head to the Łagiewniki forest. Initially, the club chairman's statement seemed like a solid alibi. The seminar appeared to be an event that ensured reliable confirmation of Kowalski's presence at a specific place at a specific time. However, a detailed verification of the event schedule and clarification of the time of Kowalski's departure proved the opposite. A significant period remained after the end of the suspect's participation in the seminar, which made the alibi partial and unreliable. The fact of his early departure transformed the initially convincing version of the club chairman into a false lead, which was now officially closed. While the investigation continued its work in the club, one of the members of Łódź Classic Cars, who had not made statements earlier, shared a new, important detail. He clearly remembered that Kowalski had a club jacket that was decorated with embroidery with the initials AK. These were the same initials that had been discovered earlier on the towel under the found remains in the Łagiewniki forest. The information from the witness looked like serious confirmation of Kowalski's connection to the crime, and significantly strengthened the investigation's suspicions. The police officers immediately entered the statements into the case files and decided not to postpone the search any longer. Now it became obvious that checking Kowalski's apartment and garage was inevitable and had to be carried out as quickly as possible before the suspect had time to eliminate possible evidence. The investigators hastily prepared a request to the prosecutor's office of the city of Łódź and sent it to obtain authorization for searching Andrzej Kowalski's living space and garage. At this point, the investigation no longer doubted being on the right path and that Kowalski was a key figure in the mysterious disappearances. In parallel, the police began a thorough check of all the suspect's contacts, paying particular attention to recent purchases of chemicals and medications, including diazepam. On the 12th of April, the police finally received permission and began searching Andrzej Kowalski's garage and apartment. The operation began early in the morning, without prior notification of the suspect, which guaranteed the preservation of possible evidence. Kowalski's garage proved to be a carefully closed and equipped space that was obviously not intended only for ordinary car storage. In the center of the room stood a green Polonaise car without license plates, which was already known to the investigation through numerous witness testimonies. During the first examination of the trunk, the investigators noticed a strange detail. Its entire inner surface was carefully lined with dense, waxed cloth film. This aroused suspicion, and the crime technicians immediately took samples from the seams and edges of the film for expertise. The expertise quickly gave initial results. In the seams of the film, tiny fabric balls were found. Laboratory tests confirmed complete correspondence of the samples with the material of the towel with embroidered initials AK that had been found earlier in the bag, with remains. On a shelf next to the car, the investigators discovered another important piece of evidence: empty blister packs of diazepam marked with the release series 2003/11. This series completely matched the data from the bone marrow analysis of Tomasz Bednarczyk, the first identified victim. Under the pressure of obvious evidence, Kowalski began giving explanations. He categorically denied any involvement in the disappearances of people and insisted on completely different motives and circumstances. About the car, he explained that it was allegedly in the restoration process, hence the film to protect the trunk. To the question about diazepam, Kowalski quickly answered that the tablets were not intended for him personally, but for a known homeless man who suffered from epilepsy. This version sounded unconvincing and could not completely dispel the suspicions against Kowalski. However, the alibi was formally not yet definitively destroyed. While the police continued analyzing the evidence found in the garage, a new witness came to the investigators, a neighborhood boy who had observed the events from the street. According to his words, he saw a few days ago, namely on the 10th of April, how the Polonaise car was driven by a completely different man. The boy confidently described the man at the wheel as unknown and completely unlike Kowalski. This detail immediately created uncertainty and gave the police reason to suspect that the car could also be used by other persons, which complicated the investigation picture and led to new suspicions. However, this statement received a completely different meaning when the investigation quickly checked the city protocols of recent days. It turned out that exactly on the night of the 10th of April, a University of Łódź student named A. Katz had disappeared. According to preliminary information, the girl completely fit the previously established victim profile, approximately the same age and appearance. This detail extremely disturbed the investigation because now it became clear that the perpetrator was still acting and possibly continued using the Polonaise car. Against the background of new circumstances, the police were forced to return again to a version that already seemed closed, checking Forester Janusz Nowak. Although his alibi was confirmed, now the possibility arose that exactly his car was secretly borrowed and used by other persons. This could explain the appearance of the unknown driver that the young witness had noticed. With extreme caution, the investigators decided to recheck Nowak's whereabouts on the night of the student's disappearance, understanding that much depended on this for the further course of the investigation. Doubts arose again, and Nowak became the subject of covert surveillance again. While the investigators prepared for the next step, they revealed no details about the missing student and hoped that the pressure of this information would cause someone involved in the proceedings to make a mistake. On the early morning of the 18th of April, the investigators began examining Andrzej Kowalski's apartment, already a participant in the official investigation. The atmosphere in the apartment was neutral, not standing out at first glance, but the investigators knew that exactly small details often decide the outcome of a case. The first thing that attracted the crime technicians' attention was a package of disposable construction bags of brand F neatly hidden in the back drawer of the desk. Exactly such bags had been discovered earlier in the Łagiewniki forest. This discovery clearly connected Kowalski with the crime scene and made his previous justification attempts meaningless. The next discovery aroused even greater interest from the investigation. On a shelf between other books stood an old edition of Human Anatomy. During examination, bookmarks were discovered on pages devoted to the structure of joints and connective tissue. This fact seemed important, especially given earlier expert conclusions about the surgically precise removal of soft tissues from the found remains. During further verification of Kowalski's biography, the investigators established an important fact of his previous employment. It turned out that a few years ago, until 2002, he had worked in the sewage service of the district hospital. He was responsible for technical maintenance, which gave him access to various rooms, including the medication warehouse. In the year 2002, Kowalski left the position after a conflict with management. However, he failed to return the keys to the hospital rooms. This fact aroused suspicion about possible unauthorized access to medications already after dismissal. The investigators decided to study the warehouse journals and reports of the hospital's pharmaceutical service for 2003 in more detail. The chief pharmacist, who had long refused to cooperate, was forced to admit that in the autumn of 2003, a serious shortage was discovered. About 600 ampoules of diazepam. In an attempt to verify the version about medication leakage, the police questioned Kowalski's former colleagues. One of them confidently stated that after Kowalski's dismissal, all locks in the rooms were replaced with new ones. Therefore, unauthorized access by the former employee was excluded. Nevertheless, the investigation discovered no documents or official protocols of lock replacement. Without official confirmation, the fact of key replacement remained only words that had no evidentiary force. Therefore, this version was entered into the list of false ones, although it was formally not completely refuted. While the investigators studied Kowalski's past, his medical record came to light. The document was partially classified and stood under the heading restricted access. The investigation only managed to find out one thing. Andrei Kowalski had previously been diagnosed with dissocial personality disorder. Details of the diagnosis were not disclosed. However, it became clear that this could seriously affect the court proceedings and qualification of the crimes of which he is suspected. The court ordered immediate psychiatric expertise to obtain exhaustive answers about the suspect's mental state. Parallel to examining Kowalski's personality, the police began an internal review of investigator Radetzky's work, who had previously handled the disappearance cases in 2001 to 2002. The investigation suspected that exactly his negligence and superficial investigation of those years allowed the perpetrator to remain unnoticed for so long. Together with this, the question of Forester Janusz Nowak's role was raised again. The latest events brought the investigators to doubt his alibi again, despite the confirmations. The police officers decided to act cautiously and check every detail to definitively exclude or confirm Nowak's possible involvement. On the 25th of April, a special commission of the Internal Security Administration began reviewing the work of Major Bartosz Radetzky, who led the missing persons cases in 2001 to 2002. Suspicion was aroused that Radetzky often closed cases about missing persons without fruitful investigation and justified this with the absence of search perspectives. During thorough verification of the archives, the investigators quickly noticed a series of 12 cases that Radetzky had closed. Document analysis revealed an amazing detail. In all interrogation protocols and reports, identical, literally copied paragraphs appeared. This clearly pointed to the investigators' formal approach, ignoring facts and absence of genuine operational work. Such negligence obviously indicated the investigators' unwillingness to delve deeply into the details of each concrete case. At the same time, a report was discovered that Radetzky had submitted in the spring of 2004 for a service promotion. This gave reason to suspect him of careerism and the desire to get rid of problematic cases more quickly to avoid claims from superior leadership and ease his way up. The investigators decided to verify Radetzky's claims about the impossibility of making contact with relatives of the missing persons. The commission staff conducted telephone conversations with families of several people whose cases had been closed. The relatives unanimously confirmed that in recent years, no one from the police had made contact with them. No calls or letters had been received. When questioned by the investigators, Radetzky answered briefly and evasively. Allegedly, all contacts were outdated and did not allow for repeated conversations. However, verification of the telephone numbers showed that all listed contacts were active and functional during the entire investigation period. It became clear that Radetzky had simply made no attempts to contact the relatives and was deliberately hiding this. During the course of the verification, another version emerged. Possible monetary bribery that Radetzky had received for closing the cases. However, Despite the logic of such a hypothesis, the investigators discovered not a single documentary or material proof confirming the receipt of bribes. The inspection of Radetzky's office ended with an unexpected discovery that gave the case a completely different turn. In the investigators' safe, a neatly hidden envelope was discovered containing a photograph of burned human remains. On the back of the photograph was a short pencil note, a K, 62. In response to the investigators' question, Radetzky explained that he had received the envelope by mail from an unknown sender, but deliberately did not add it to the files, fearing to complicate the investigation and worsen the clearance. Statistics. The police officers quickly established that the number 62 corresponded to the internal index of one of the closed cases about a missing person from 2002. Now the connection between Kowalski and this missing person was practically proven, which strengthened the suspicions against both. Parallel to the verification of Radetzky's activities, the expert analyses of the car belonging to Forester Janusz Nowak, who had previously been suspected of involvement in the crimes, were completed. The experts definitively established that the profile of his Polonaise tire treads did not match the relief of the vehicle track discovered at the location of the third finding of remains. Thus, Nowak was officially excluded from the number of suspects, and the version of his involvement was definitively closed. Now the investigators had only to focus exclusively on Kowalski and clarify Radetzky's responsibility for the permitted negligence. The verification continued, but already it was clear that the cases of the missing persons could have been solved considerably earlier if the investigator had conscientiously fulfilled his duties. Thus, the price of the investigative system's error acquired a completely different scale than had been assumed at the beginning of the investigation. On the 10th of February 2005, one of the most extensive and complex cases in the history of Polish criminology was concluded in the district court of the city of Łódź. The judge officially read the verdict. Andrzej Kowalski was found guilty in all 82 murder episodes that figured in the indictment. Absolute silence reigned in the courtroom. The court revealed in detail Kowalski's operational scheme, confirmed by irrefutable evidence. In a rented apartment in a quiet district of Łódź, he injected the victims with stolen diazepam, after which he transported the people in his green Polonaise without license plates to the forest massif Łagiewniki, located 20 kilometers from the city. According to verification of the transport logistics, the journey took about 25 minutes. There, Kowalski eliminated the traces that could have led to him. All details of the accusation were carefully verified and proven. The diazepam discovered in the remains completely matched the series that had been stolen from the hospital warehouse to which Kowalski had access after his dismissal. The embroidery with the initials AK that appeared on towels and clothing was his personal marking system with which he designated objects that had special meaning for him. The experts conducted complex examinations. The relief of the vehicle track left in the forest at pits number 2 and 6 perfectly matched the pattern of the tire treads of Kowalski's car. The coal dust found at the bottom of the pits was identical to samples taken from Kowalski's garage. This trace completely closed the chain of evidence. The photograph of burned remains found in Major Radetzky's safe had a different nature. The investigation established that this was an attempt by an unknown anonymous informant to draw police attention to the series of disappearances. When the judge began to read the conclusions of the forensic psychiatric expertise that recognized Andrzej Kowalski as mentally incompetent, the accused calmly interrupted him. Looking directly into the camera of the court record, Kowalski spoke with a cold tone, only a few words. "The account is incomplete. You will learn about it later." Then he quickly pulled a spring clip made from a metal coil out of his sleeve and threw it in the direction of the court secretary. The escort on duty nearby intercepted the object before it reached its target. The accused himself showed no emotion because of the failed attempt, simply continued to look silently straight ahead. After a brief pause, the court continued the session. Kowalski gave no additional explanations. In the final court decision, Andrzej Kowalski was recognized as mentally incompetent and sent for indefinite compulsory treatment to a closed psychiatric institution of strict regime. The court materials recorded that the number of victims was officially established as 82 plus n, which emphasized the uncertainty and probability of the existence of other unknown episodes. The investigation against Major Bartosz Radetzky was separated into a distinct proceeding, within the framework of which the verification of the degree of his responsibility for systematic negligence continued. Precise data about the number of victims, Radetzky's role and all accompanying circumstances remained secret.